Omer, thanks for joining us today. So right now, the headlines are bleak. They don't look too great. Everybody's panicking. Rates just went up again. And naturally, a lot of people are freaking out about this right now. So first question for you today is that if you look at the interest rates today and you compare them to pre-pandemic, where are we relative to pre-pandemic?
Hey Ricky, thanks for having me on. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Things are looking a little bit bleak, especially if you're watching the news or if you're reading headlines. There's a lot of doom and gloom, right? And generally that is what happens. Media kind of takes something and just goes full steam ahead with it. But having said that, I mean, yes, there's a challenge in the market right now, right? Inflation at this point is 253% above the 20-year average, right? We try to target a 2% inflation rate in Canada. Right now we're above 8, and it is getting worse. And with surging rates, a 5-year fixed rate borrower today is paying $30,000 more in interest compared to what they were, last fall. So interest rates are definitely higher. They have now peaked above what they were last year prior to the pandemic, actually, or 2 years ago before the pandemic. And then obviously during the pandemic, you had the quantitative easing from the government of Canada with hundreds of billions of dollars pumped into the financial markets, which yes, lowered the rates significantly. So at this point in time, yes, inflation is at an all-time high. And the biggest question that everybody really has is, will it get worse? And unfortunately, the answer to that is that yes, it will most likely get worse. Supply shocks from the Ukraine war, the lockdowns in China, the oil spike, it's not over yet. They aren't finished working their way through the global economies. And look at price of crude oil, for example, right? Like this isn't over yet. So at this point in time, Bank of Canada's mandate is, how do we tackle inflation? What do we do? And unfortunately for the Bank of Canada, the only tool at their disposal is interest rates. What can they do, to tackle inflation? Obviously, rate tightening, that's one thing. And the other one would be, fiscal sensibility, where politicians are buying votes amid, record low unemployment. And just spending irrationally. We've seen that happening just a little while ago. So apart from that, what can they do? They have to tighten rates. That's the only thing. But will that help? Will that alone help? I don't know. Because if you look at inflation, it is at this point a global issue, right? Inflation in the UK is over 8%. It's actually over 9% in the UK right now. Inflation in the US, over 8%. It's literally everywhere. It's a global issue because of supply chains. They've been decimated over the past couple of years, and this will take its time to work itself, out of the economy. It's not going to be super fast. It's not going to be something that's going to just correct itself overnight. So what happens next? Well, Bank of Canada has already, like you said, they've already raised their the prime rate by 50 basis points on June 1st. That means the interest rate is now, the prime rate is now 3.7. What does that mean? That means that, if you're on a variable rate mortgage, your payment has gone up by $24 per $100,000 of mortgage. And your HELOC rates are now at 4.2%, which is starting to get a little bit more concerning because, if you're keeping big balances on HELOC, you're starting to pay a lot more interest. So what will happen next? If inflation continues to be the way it is, which likely it will, Bank of Canada will have to move again. And when is that? That's on July. That's in July. So in July, we expect Bank of Canada will most likely increase prime rate by another 0.5%. And it may not be over there. Bank of Canada may continue increasing rates into next year with another 1% hike. And that could be another 25 basis points and 25 basis points after that. But either way, you're looking at probably another 1% increase to 1.25% increase in prime rate in the near term. That's what's going to happen.
That's really interesting. And I think a lot of, a lot of people that might be watching this are wondering, well, what is it that, correlates inflation to the interest rates? And I think a big part of it in understanding is that when you've got more supply of money in the system, you've got higher inflation. That's literally what it is. And so the bank using this as a tool by increasing those interest rates, they're making money more expensive, so people return it, thereby bringing inflation down.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting in our scenario is that coming out of the pandemic, supply chain has been deeply impacted, and based on the things that I'm reading and the things that I'm, engaging with online, and the pundits that I'm speaking with, what I'm hearing is that unless we have a resolution to the supply chain issue, it's going to continue to go down this path where we're going to see the interest hikes continue. Now, with the expectation that they will continue, a lot of people are wondering, well, if I've got a good rate now, should I lock it in? Or should I continue to wait and see where it's going to land? Because I can lock in down the road as well. What do you think would be, and obviously it's not a case by case scenario when you're dealing with somebody that's got a mortgage, but generally speaking, is there a rule of thumb in terms of when you lock in, or should you not lock in? Like, is there a threshold that you look at as a mortgage agent?
Yeah, and that's a good question, Ricky. I mean, as you know, everybody's circumstances are different, right? But having said that, if you're going to compare fixed rates today to variable rates, and you're going to, decide, if you're going to go fixed or variable, or if you're on a variable rate mortgage right now and you're going to fix in, you have to be, you have to be mindful of a couple of things. First and foremost is that if you're locking into a 5-year fixed rate mortgage today, you are probably locking into an extremely high rate, higher than we've ever, you've seen in the last decade or more, right? So you're taking a risk of locking into an extremely high rate for a long period of time. And not only that, you're locking into a fixed rate mortgage where you're opening yourself up to a 900% interest rate differential penalty should you break that mortgage before term end. And if you look at the stats, over 80% of 5-year fixed rate mortgages are actually broken within the first 36 months. And there's tons of reasons for that. Obviously, people are moving, people are, their marital split ups happen, life happens in general, right? And you end up hoarding or breaking your term. So if you do that, you're opening yourself up to a massive interest rate differential penalty. But more importantly than that, what you have to realize is the delta between fixed and variable right now is still significant. So if you're on a variable rate mortgage and you try to fix in today, you're getting a much higher rate on the fixed rate. And the way it accumulates is if you were to take a fixed rate today over a variable, you are self-imposing at least 6 interest rate hikes on yourself in one day. So I still think variable is not a bad option, even if you factor in another 1% increase or 1.5% increase. I think what's more important right now is because before the argument always used to be fixed versus variable. Now the argument has changed. Now it's fixed versus adjustable versus static. So variable rate mortgages are not the same with every bank. Variable rate mortgages come in 2 options. They come in adjustable rate and static. So adjustable rate is plain and simple. When prime rate goes up, when Bank of Canada hikes their interest rate, your mortgage payment goes up right away. But static payment is what happens is when Bank of Canada increases your prime rate, your mortgage payment stays the same. So your budget is unaffected. But what happens is that your amortization may go up because more of your mortgage payment is going towards interest as opposed to principal. So mortgage payment is paid up mortgage payment is made up of 2 parts, principal and interest. And that equation essentially changes. So at this point in time, there's a lot of people that are concerned about, payments changing because of prime rate going up and your budget being compromised. And if that's the case, then you may want to explore a static payment bank like, TD or CIBC or, BMO. Adjustable rate lenders like Scotiabank may not be the best bet for you. But again, everybody's different. And everyone's situation is going to be different. But if you are taking a fixed rate mortgage, I would probably recommend going with a shorter term. maybe like a 2-year or 3-year term. And the reason for that is that I do believe interest rates will return to net neutral. If they don't do that next year, then I would imagine by at least middle or end of next year, we may start seeing net neutral rates. So what are net neutral rates? Net neutral rates essentially we have figured out this inflationary challenge, right? Because initially, remember when Bank of Canada was talking about inflation, they used to use the word transitory, right, or transitional. And again, they used transitional was because, again, they assumed that a lot of this is happening because of supply chain challenges, which I still believe is partially true, especially when you look at crude oil, which is responsible for a significant amount of the CPI. So I would imagine when supply chains, they're starting to get better now, when they resolve themselves and inflation starts curbing, and you start seeing that next year, hopefully by the end of the year, we will start seeing interest rates come back to a more normalized approach where your fixed rates will be back into the 3 to 4% range, and your variables are going to be back into the mid 2s to high 2s range. That's what we're seeing. But what are you thinking about real estate at this point, Vicky? Do you feel that values will continue to decline, or are you seeing that already kind of hit the peak and valleys right down to the valley? What are you seeing?
Well, Mira, I'm going to circle back to that question right to the very end. I got 1 or 2 more questions here that came to mind as you're giving me those insights, and they're brilliant. So first and foremost, when it comes to the historic interest rates, we've seen the 80s, the 90s, we've seen the 2000s. What I'm understanding is that if you lock in now, there's a chance that they could come back, and then you're going to shoot yourself at that time because you can't break the fix that you've closed because the penalties are enormous, right? And when we look at the trends, even historically, comparing right now and even another couple basis points increase relative to 2006, 2007, 2008, even the mid 15, 16, 17, I think our interest rates are still pretty good compared to some of those times that wasn't more than 2 decades ago. Is that fair to say that we're still in a very reasonable realm?
No, I think you're right. It's really hard to compare those markets. 2017, yes, you can compare that. 2008, sure, you can compare that. 1990s, very difficult to compare. Prices of real estate were very different back then, right? But the bigger issue is the market was very different. The amount of foreign investment that we now have in Canada it was fraction of that back in the 1990s, right? The level of immigration that we welcome into this country, this economically vital immigration that we get into this country every year, which we haven't seen much of in the last 2 years, but it is expected again, right? It was fraction of that back in the 1990s. So it's definitely not the same market. I've seen a lot of reports where they're talking about, this happened in the 1990s and it took 7, 8, 9 years to correct, or for the values to kind of catch up again. It's not the same market. Prices were different, interest rates were a little bit higher. Yes, they corrected themselves, but one thing is for sure, if you look at the trajectory of real estate, every 10 years we've seen the same thing.
Yeah, for sure we have. For sure we have. Yeah. And so Amir, with that said, there's a point where if the Bank of Canada increases its rates so far, does there come a point where we start seeing the banks start undercutting rates, where they start offering prime minus? Or is there a point where we're going to see consumers start going to credit unions or private lending? Like, what is your thought on that? If the rates keep going up, are we going to start seeing some banks compete for consumer business as that happens?
I think for the short term, the banks' profit margins are going to decline a little bit. Banks will still make record amount of money. Don't get me wrong, right? They always do. That's not going to change, but they may not make as much money as they did in the last couple of years. I think in the near term, the banks could possibly even go to no discount on prime. So I think that's coming. I also think that fixed rates will probably go above the 5% mark, close to 6%. But I think that's about it. I don't think I don't think the interest rates can go over 7%. And you have to understand the logic behind this, Ricky, right? If interest rates go above 6% in our market, government intervention will be required. It will be needed. And the reason behind that is not because real estate itself will halt, right? Yes, real estate will pretty much halt, right? The activity will slow down, but it's not just the activity, it's the other thing. What about, hundreds and thousands of mortgages that are coming up for renewal annually? You have a mortgage of, let's say, $1 million or $800,000, and your interest rate was 3.2% or 3.5%. Boom, you're now coming up for renewal, and the bank is offering you a renewal rate at 7%. Can you imagine the fallout? Right? It is going to be catastrophic, right? Like there's no other way of putting it. So I do think that there is a limit, and I think we're already starting to see our market being tested. I think the Feds will be very, very careful as to how much they can stretch this. Near term, yes, they need to get inflation under control, but to what end? Well, you know what I mean? Like they can't risk sending our economy into recession just trying to solve this inflationary issue. So I forgot what your question was initially because I went on to a completely different rant. But yeah, I do think that interest rates in the near term, could go towards 5% on the fixed side. Variable side, I think your discounts could potentially disappear. What does that mean? That means your variable rates could go into the 4% range, and your fixed rates could go into the 5%, 5.5% range. But I think that would probably be the highest. That would be the peak of interest rates. I don't think it would go any further than that. I don't think the economy could tolerate that.
Makes sense. Yeah, I agree. And so going back to the market now from a real estate perspective, I think that you've got to take what you see online with a grain of salt. Only because when you've got the media that says that the market is crashing year over year, you've got to read between the lines and you've got to read the fine print. And so as an example, 2021 was a banner year for the Toronto Real Estate Board. We've never seen that many transactions on the record ever. And so I've been saying for the longest time now that we're not going to hit those levels this year. We're probably not going to hit those levels next year. And so when you compare year over year, the number of sales, the number of transactions, and you see that decline, it's a pretty tasty headline to say that the market's dropped by 20%. When in fact, what it is, when you're looking at, for example, April or May 2022 versus 2021, because we had a banner record year, it's only downhill from there until it isn't. And so I think that's a big part of the headline. In addition to that, we've seen, some of the changes with the budgets that have been proposed and some of the things that have actually been action now, right? With assignment sales and, there's a lot of stuff about banning foreign investors for the next year or two. There's a lot of things that are happening. So almost like 2017 when we had the Ontario 16-point plan and the Rent Fairness Act and rent control and all the other stuff that was implemented along with all the other things that impacted the real estate market. It was almost like a very quick thing that happened all of a sudden, and people stepped back for a second and said, whoa, what's going on here, right? But when you look at, for example, April and May this year compared to last year, prices were still high. Prices were still up. People still made money. Do I think people made an inordinate amount of money during the pandemic? Yes. When you talk to the economists and the pundits, what they'll explain is that we had a recession-like environment, and so we had very low interest rates. And the people that theoretically should have lost their jobs didn't lose their jobs. And so what you had was people that could afford to buy real estate didn't lose their jobs. They had record low interest rates, and they started borrowing from the future, which is why we saw more transactions. Okay. And so if you're, in my opinion, if you're someone that buys to speculate, you buy to flip, probably something to be concerned about if that's your MO, versus if your goal is to buy real estate, live in it, or hold it for 10 years. Like you said, most people haven't lost money in real estate if you look at any decade, really. Okay. And I think that even today, if you can't afford to purchase a home versus rental, you can't be reno evicted out of a home that you own, right? even if rent control applies or doesn't apply, depending on the property, on the type of property you're occupying as a tenant, owning a home gives you safety and security. And we recognize now more than ever post-pandemic that it's a very valuable thing to own a home, especially now more than ever. And so do I think that prices are going to come down? I think that we're going to end up in a balanced market before we end up in a seller's market. What I think is happening right now is that you've got people that were trying to sell in May, June, July, the hot summer markets. Those people ended up buying January, February, March when the market was peaking, quote unquote. So they purchased hoping to sell now for a high price as well to bridge that purchase.
Yep.
And then we had all of these things happen all of a sudden. And now they've got properties that are on the market that aren't getting any attention. They've already committed to purchase something. And so most people that'll talk to a lawyer like me that recognize the potential legal pitfall of doing that are going to try to offload that real estate so they can close the purchase. Now, with that, naturally, you're going to see a 30 to 120 day window where you've got people that really desperately need to sell to be able to close their purchase that are doing it. Is that going to play a part in pricing? Sure it is, right? Where you look at areas like Durham, where you've got a parcel of tied land, a townhouse parcel of tied land with a condominium component, that's selling for 1.2 million when last year it was selling for 900, you wonder, right? But you always see that in this transition. You always saw this in 2017. People ended up buying at the peak and then couldn't close. And so that happens. And again, it's a part of the cycle. It's just, it's unfortunate for the people that get hit in the crossfire when that happens. So do I think eventually everything's going to work out? Sure. Just like mortgages, I think real estate's going to work out. Now, talking about immigration very quickly, if you look at it, you compare Canada to the US. So the US is literally 10 times larger than us. Let's say we're 35 million to 350 million. In 2021, based on an article I read, Canadians had 401,000 immigrants. Now, these aren't people that flew into the country last year. These are students. These are people that became PR. They expedited the process. So we had 401,000 people become PRs last year, okay? You compare that with the US, they had 500,000 immigrants, only 99,000 more than us, but they're 10 times larger. And so when you look at what that's going to do in the long run, most people that enter this country are entering because they've married a Canadian. Yeah. They're very wealthy. They're very educated. They don't just give out PR status and citizenship in this country to anybody. It is an effort, right? It was David Suzuki. It was an article back in like 2011 that he wrote, Canada is literally sucking the human capital from the rest of the world. We've got doctors that are driving our cabs in some instances. So you look at all of this, you look at the fact that we're going to have an insatiable demand. It's going to continue. You look at the fact that we're going to see immigration once things properly open up, and we're starting to see things open up now. So you add all of these things together. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive to purchase today, but somebody that recognizes the value of home ownership is going to make that step. And we're going to continue to see the sorts of things that we're going to see, which means that in the long term, things should be just fine if you're a homeowner. If you're a speculator, different story, potentially. But that's the risk in that business as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think if you have the power to hold, and if you're buying real estate to hold, and that's what we tell all of our clients, and most of our clients, even your clients, Ricky, I think everybody's buying to hold. We don't really have too much speculation, business that I know of. But yeah, if you're buying to hold, I don't think you're going to run into any challenges. But the only question that I have, because I get it from my clients as well, do you think we've hit the bottom of the valley
at this time?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard to say, right? Because you've got a lot of smoke and mirrors from government intervention. You've got the media that's hyping things up as well. And then the unfortunate part is that, there's people that are misinformed. So you've got a lot of people right now that are saying, oh, we're in a buyer's market, things are crazy. And so if you don't have the right professional guiding you and educating you in terms of what's happening, then you could end up in a lot of trouble making decisions hastily and then regretting them in the long run. And so I think now more than ever, having a good lawyer, having a good realtor, having a good mortgage agent are very, very, very critical. And if you're somebody out there that's watching this and you're trying to navigate this on your own, you should connect with someone that can help educate and help qualify and if not quantify some of the things that you're seeing and hearing online, because there's always two sides to the coin. And in any sort of business, any sort of profession, you can only make informed decisions if you see everything. Okay. And so in this marketplace with, all of the stuff we have online and the access to resources and professionals, it's really critical that you have the right people in your arena when you're trying to navigate these waters. That's for sure.
It's the most important thing. You have to be dealing with a professional and the right professional. And real estate is also very local. Different markets are going to see different price points. They're going to see different gains and losses. But at the end of the day, history will tell you that as long as you hold, you're going to be fine. You will end up making more money because, just like you said, immigration is coming in. That's not going to stop. And, supply's always been an issue in the GTA especially, and that's not going to change. So, I think there's, if anything, there's a lot of opportunity at this time because, I hate to say it, but like you said, there's some people that will need to, disposition of their property is something that they need to do. And, if you're there at the right time with a good professional, they should be able to maneuver around and maybe, get you a good deal now.
Yeah. Amir, at the end of the day, I think you'll appreciate this more than anybody as a mortgage agent. The fact that when you're paying a blended monthly mortgage payment, a portion of that pays down the actual loan. You're paying down your principal, right? And even in most instances, even if you see morbid appreciation, let's say you see a 1% appreciation per year. If you look at 1% appreciation on the average home today for the whole year, again, I'm emphasizing morbid situation, plus you add the principal payments, you still made money to live in your own asset. You can't say that about any other investment. You can't say that about anything else, really, as far as I'm concerned. And so knowing that it's yours, you can live in it, you can rent it, you can gift it, you can give it away. There's something special about real estate. And I think that people do cherish that in this country.
It's always been the dream, Ricky. Home ownership has always been the dream. And I don't think that's not changing, right? And really, it has been, one of the best investments that anybody's ever made. And just like, any market and any investment, there's peaks and valleys. So you just have to make sure your timing is right. And, obviously you can't predict the market, but if you're working with a good professional, with the right real estate agent, you can make some good decisions at this time.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Omer, for connecting. I know that the people watching are really going to appreciate the insights here today. If anybody wants to get a hold of Omer or me, I'm going to make sure that you can see the phone numbers below here. And we look forward to connecting with you and supporting you in any way we can, especially during these times. Thank you again. We'll talk soon.
Thank you so much, Ricky. Take care.